Welcome back. Chapter 7, Voting and Election. Lecture notes and reading. I'm going to try to do something here I might instantly regret. We'll see. Just going to kind of walk you through my notes and how they came out of the reading. So I'm kind of expanding upon my lecture notes here. At least then we can have some pictures to look at, right? By the way, this is a picture of Ted Cruz, who is a Republican primary candidate for president. Let's see. This is 2016, so it was a primary that Trump ended up winning and then beating Hillary Clinton in. But this is at Bob Jones University, which is in Greenville. Let's jump straight to that first section here. We look at voter registration. Well, guess what? Voter registration, there's state by state contests. You have Iowa, you have Florida, you have Ohio, you have South Carolina, you have all these different states that you register to vote in those states. They have varying registration and voting laws across the U.S. They were really varying before the 1960s. So basically the 1860s through the 1960s, it was kind of the Wild West of how you registered to vote. The 24th Amendment ended the poll taxes in 1964. If you recall from previous chapter, poll taxes were literally either a tax or you had to pay to vote, which eliminated a lot of poor people, or you had to take an intelligence test, which was meant to take if you couldn't read, you couldn't vote, that type of thing. So it kept a lot of people from voting. It kept them from registering for vote. So the 24th Amendment in 1964 ended the poll taxes and led to the Voting Rights Act of VRA in 1965. This led to significant increases in voter registration. I think somewhere here in the reading, I was reading last night. Yeah, that's right. I do the reading too. Or at least I hope you're doing the reading. Somewhere, I think Mississippi, the participation rate or the voter registration went amongst I think it was, here it is right here. Here's some numbers. The number I remember that stuck out to me at some point, it's somewhere in here. Something like 6% of African Americans before 1964 were voting were registered to vote, and after this something like 65-70% of African Americans voted. So you could tell that poll taxes were definitely regressive against a particular demographic. So some states have more modern day, some states have moved to voter registration online. States with simpler methods tend to have more registered voters, and vice versa. If you have a really convoluted voter registration process, you tend to have less people voting. There are residency requirements. You must be a citizen, must be a resident, must be 18 years old, and there are others that require voters to not be serving jail time. Most states, but not all, say, hey, you can't be a convicted felon, and obviously, if you're deemed mentally unfit, you can't vote. So, some states are more stringent than others. A lot of states are a little more lax. It just depends. And states love to argue back and forth as to what is the most appropriate method of doing this. So that's kind of your voter registration section. Obviously, it's not a thorough enough summary to replace everything I'm scrolling here on the left. But I just want to come down and show you the who's allowed to register. We just covered that very briefly. We're going to move on to what we call voter turnout. Now, voter turnout, there's a couple different terms here you need to know about. It's voting age population, VAP, people 18 and over that have registered to vote. But then that's different than the voting eligible population, VEP, people 18 and over that may or may not have registered to vote. So everybody 18 and over, save for being felons or mentally unfit, you can register to vote. But a lot of people haven't done that. In 2012, 87% of registered voters voted. So most of the people who took the time to register to vote actually vote. But something like 42% of the total population only voted in 2012 in the major election, presidential election. Of the VAP, voting age population, 60% voted, 57%, and the VEP, 60% voted. So you actually, what we're talking about in class today, more people vote for American Idol than vote for president. Let that sink in for a second. More people vote in American Idol than do president. Now, somebody say, well, I can vote for American Idol on my phone. I can vote multiple times. Okay, fine. But more people, by a lot, vote for American Idol than they do president. whoever wins American Idol is not going to affect your life in 3 years. Whoever votes, becomes president or congressman, that can affect your life for sure. Low voter turnout causes concern and frustration. Young people largely do not vote. So I'm talking young people like 18 to 24. Largely just don't vote. And keep in mind, women were not allowed to vote until 1920. Okay, so goodness gracious, that's a large part of the population. So what factors drive voter turnout? You see a little picture in here, a little Rock the Vote. That was a big thing back when I was in college. Early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s. Rock the Vote was like a thing. Like they came to colleges and threw parties and stuff, and had voter registration drives. So political campaigns can drive turnout. You can be very passionate about a political party, about a political candidate. Voter registration drives and campaigns. Pre-COVID, student government would do a huge voter registration drive here at the school. Worry not, I actually have a link at the end of these notes that's you still have time to register to vote in any major fall election, which we're going into in November when I'm recording this. As long as you register by early October, you can actually still do it, and you have until October the 4th. So socioeconomic status tends to have a high correlation with people who vote. People with more education, more income, higher social status tend to vote more than people with less education, less income, and lower social status. There's also availability to work. Some people are working parents. They got to take their kids to school. They got to go to work. They pick them up after school. They just simply don't have time to vote. People have job commitments. They travel. Some options there are absentee voting. That typically starts. Absentee voting typically starts, if you guys hear a piano in the background, my daughter just started her piano lesson for the day. Enjoy the music if you can hear it. But absentee voting, you physically go in to vote, but you go in to vote early. For example, we're heading to the presidential election of 2020 when I'm recording this. The local Spartanburg County absentee voting starts October the 5th. You actually have until October the 4th to register to vote online. And October the 5th, you could actually vote absentee. So I'm actually going to take that advantage. I work really hard on Tuesdays. I have more lecture on Tuesdays and more commitments, meetings, and everything. So I'm actually just going to go in and vote on a random Friday in October. And I'm just going to go in on a Friday when I'm not busy. I'm going to vote absentee. And I'll keep my sticker and put it on during Super Tuesday. That's an option. I go, I show my ID, and I vote just like I would normally. If you're curious, in Spartanburg, due to the COVID pandemic, the voting is usually held at the county building. You actually have the Krispy Kreme right across the street from Wofford, basically. The Krispy Kreme, you have the morgue, believe it or not, the tax area, and then Death in Texas, right? And then on the other corner, you actually have the voting commission. But this year, due to COVID-19, they're actually allowing you to vote at the Spartanburg Memorial Auditorium, which is across the street from the Krispy Kreme. So you know what? You can go vote, go get some hot and ready. You're all set, man. Good for you. There's also mail-in balloting, and that is a really hot button. COVID, it kind of makes sense that you mail some in. However, there are some problems with mail-in balloting. It's back and forth between the courts as whether or not you have to have a witness to have a vote, but then you have to interact with people if you're worried about a pandemic. That's an issue. But if I have a household with 6 people in it that are 18 and older, I could just vote for everybody and fill out all 6 ballots. That's a problem. If you fill out your ballots incorrectly, they're immediately thrown out. So who's screening these things? Federal Election Commission, FEC. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But what if they decide, I want so-and-so to win? So they just throw out all the ballots that have someone else vote. That's a little dicey. So there's some problems there. It's a hot button topic. Photo identification laws vary from, being very lax to very strict in different states. In South Carolina, you have to present a photo ID. Their mail-in balloting for all the problems we just listed a second ago, and then worries about the news cycle. We have human bias. That's something you just can't help that, and you have what we call fake news. All right, that runs on both sides of the aisle. So we can have problems with fake news. Here's a great breakdown in the reading about how many people voted versus total population, that type of thing. Definitely take a look at that. John McCain. There we go. Voting over time, we look at these populations. That's actually a downward trend that's kind of concerning. Let's take a look here in your reading. Yeah, this stuff here's called the reading. It'll help you get a hundo on the quiz. It's amazing. They hide all the answers in the book. So here's your classic polling situation. So you have to be careful about, fake news, bias, that type of thing. have to really get your information from a lot of different sections, or sectors, I should say. Or sources might be the best word. Elections, deciding to run. So this is like, hey, you're going to run. It varies by state, locality, and position. Some collect signatures to get on a ballot. Some simply pay a fee. Once upon a time, I actually looked at running for a state office, and I was like a state representative, rather. And all it took was I had some deadline, had to go down to the county building and pay $200 to run. I decided not to do it because I just don't want anybody complaining about me, complaining to me about, their garbage man is rude or something. I just didn't want to deal with it. But I got to deal with you guys, right? I need to focus on you guys. But all I had to do was pay a fee, and I've been on the ballot. Isn't that cool? You must meet residency requirements, i.e. if you're running for something in Spartanburg County, you better live in Spartanburg County. If you're trying to vote in South Carolina, you better live in South Carolina, etc., etc. So you need to meet the residency requirements of the specific position you're running for. The bigger the role, the more financial backing you're going to need because you need to advertise. Candidates are subject to public scrutiny, all right? You have reduced privacy, background checks, media scrutiny, etc. Just comes with the business. Most elections have a candidate from each major party. However, there are some areas with what we call a supermajority, where a party in the minority support situation. And so, like, you just don't have a lot of support. You can be in California and not have a lot of Republican support because it's generally a Democratic area. You could be in Texas and not have a lot of Democratic support because it's generally a Republican area. So there's supermajorities in those areas for either party. Most candidates start with a local position, then move on to a state position before progressing to a national candidacy. That's not saying everybody. Some people are just happy being local. Some people just get to state, and that's good enough for them. Some people just have aspirations. They want some of that political power. So being a publicly elected representative presents many personal challenges. You have to balance your family with the office. That varies. You can be running for county council, and that's just like, okay, you have a job, you have a family, and you're elected. So you could be Congress, where you have a family and you're in Congress. Career in office, you have to decide, hey, if I get elected to this, I'm going to have to leave my career. And then there's extra attention in the office, one of the negatives we were talking about before. Basically, two people in a race. You can have an incumbent, the person who currently holds the office, versus a challenger. The incumbent has an advantage. I'll let you read about that right down here. But we're going to actually jump into campaign finance laws. Let's look at that. Campaign finance laws. Money is needed to run a campaign, like duh. Billions of dollars for a national high office. Millions of dollars for a national middle office or a large state high office, like governor. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for state and local middle office. Political action committees, you probably have heard about that. PACs, we'll get to super PACs here in a second, but PACs, political action committees, are organizations created to raise and spend money to influence politics and contribute to a candidate's campaigns. In 2014, for example, congressional, so people running for both the Senate and the House, those PACs raised around $1.7 billion collectively for various campaigns. That's a lot of cheddar, man. Campaign finance reform and legislation. Over the years, it's really progressed. You can go through the reading. You can talk about, man, stuff started in like 1867, see right here. And it progresses all the way through the present day. All right. In 1971, the Federal Election Campaign Act, FECA, required candidates to report. This should say report right here where my arrow is. That should say candidates to report all contributions and expenditures related to the campaign. That has to be public knowledge. It was reinforced in 1974, so 3 years later, with the creation of the Federal Election Commission, FEC, that operates independently of the government to enforce election laws. It oversees all of our elections. Slide this slightly that way. There we go. In 2002, a big one, McCain-Feingold. McCain was a Republican senator. Feingold was a Democratic senator. McCain was a Republican senator from Arizona. He actually ran for president later. Feingold was a Democratic senator from, I was going to say Washington, but it's Wisconsin. So McCain-Feingold, and a bipartisan act, and it has to be, both parties have to be on board with this, passed. So the McCain-Feingold Act passed in 2002, which restricts the amount of money given to political parties, mainly targeting companies, because companies have deep pockets, man. So they could go in, Google, Facebook, those guys, they could go in and just basically own a candidate, which is a little bit scary. So these PACs, political action committees, emerged more prevalently and have subsequently been restricted because they kind of got out of control. A subsequent Supreme Court ruling allowed for super PACs. So while a PAC, a company can't give, a super PAC, otherwise known as an independent expenditure only committee, those are funded by corporations which can contribute to the super PAC on an unrestricted nature. But super PACs cannot legally contribute directly to candidates. I know, it's getting confusing, right? So a PAC can work with a candidate. A super PAC, so a PAC can work with a candidate but can't work with companies. A super PAC is backed by a company but can't work with candidates. That's about as clear as mud, right? Super PACs are basically companies. They cannot legally contribute directly to candidates, nor can they strategize with the candidate's campaign. They can't be seen to be directly related. Wink, wink, nod, nod, you know what happens. Super PACs can, however, raise and spend an unlimited amount of money to support a candidate or attack a candidate, including running, advertisements or hosting events. Okay, so in political season, if you hear, my name is Lindsey Graham and I approve this message. My name is Jamie Harrison and I approve this message. My name is Donald Trump and I approve this message. My name is Joe Biden and I approve this message. That's coming directly from the candidate. That's much more likely to have been funded by a PAC. If you hear after that, after some sort of attack ad or informational ad, and they say, this message was paid for by People for Liberty. I just made that up. I don't know. That's probably really one. But when it says People for Liberty, or this message was paid for by people who don't want your candidate to win, but it's not the actual candidate, those are super PACs. Those are funded by companies. Think about that. So the truth is always in the fine print. And the fine print, when we're talking about advertising in terms of verbalizing it, is always when they talk fast at the end, right? It's always when we say, hey, we have this great pharmaceutical, but then it causes all these, side effects like death and violent diarrhea and the condition known as hot dog fingers. That's actually a thing. Don't Google it. It's scary. So we get to the nominating stage. Literally, there's a stage, but we get to a nomination type. And again, I need you to read through this because this is what you're doing over here is. This will get you maybe a 40 or 50 on the quiz. If you do this and that, you're going to get a hundo. So if you're doing the reading and this, you're good. Nomination stage. Political parties have taken on the role of nominating candidates. They pick candidates that suit their agenda. They guide them and financially back them, as well as elicit endorsements. The most common way of picking a party's candidate is a primary. There's a couple different kinds, 3 different kinds of primaries. Really a fourth if you count caucuses. But closed primary, it's basically 2. Closed primary, only members of the political party can vote. So you got to be like a card-carrying Republican to vote in the Republican primary, or you got to be a card-carrying Democrat to vote in a Democratic primary. Then there's an open primary. All voters can vote, but largely they can only vote in one or the other. So, for example, in South Carolina, there are open primaries. Like, I could go and vote in a Republican primary, or I could go and vote in a Democratic, but I must choose. I can't vote in both, so I have to pick one. Whereas a closed primary, you have to be a card-carrying member of your political party's membership, like their club, basically, and that's when you can go vote. In a primary, so these are people when, the Democrats have like 8 people trying to run for president and they have to narrow it down to 1, right? That's primary. There's a top 2 primary. It's not all that common, but it pits all the candidates against each other regardless of party affiliation, and the top 2 advance in the general election. So the top 2 go ahead, and then people pick between them. Regardless of the Republican or Democrat. This is kind of, trying to think where we talked about this up here. Anyway, there was a little thing I was going to tie it into in here, but I can't find it, so let's get back to it. Top 2 is basically, that's a way of just narrowing down things to start. Kind of makes me wonder why we don't do this anymore. Oh, yeah, I know what I was talking about. So we talk about parties have a supermajority. So like in California, your top 2 will be Democrat. In Texas, your top 2 will be Republican. So your top 2 primary can deal with the supermajority issue that we talked about earlier. I just couldn't find it there for a second. Thanks for bearing with me. A caucus is a meeting of party members in which nominees are selected informally. It's less expensive, very simple, and perhaps underrepresent some. The biggest caucus that you hear about on the news is the Iowa caucus, which is a Democratic primary, largely of late. Literally, they're a member of like the Democratic Party, so it's kind of like a closed primary, but not really a primary. Not everybody votes, and they have representatives that go in. I mean, it's so wild. All over Iowa, right? It's kind of a rural state, right? And they'll have like a barn, and they'll have a meeting, and they'll literally say, this person should be our candidate. They'll hear these people speak. They'll have discussions, closed discussions, open discussions. And then they'll put like a jar at the front of the room. And if there's like 3 candidates, they'll have 3 jars. And people literally put a marble in a jar. And whoever has more marbles is going to be the one who wins the caucus. It's crazy. Sometimes they pass a hat, and whoever has more than that. It is wild. It is different. So if you're at all interested in this, I beg you to check out the Iowa caucus. It's just different. Party members within the caucus select delegates who represent their choice at the party's state or national nominating convention. So when they run a primary or a caucus, you send people to the convention. We had the presidential conventions a couple months ago where it's actually a little bit delayed because of COVID, but they sent the delegates there. They actually, a lot of them just voted virtually. So each party and a candidate has a platform where they stand on a myriad of issues like the economy, abortion, national debt, international trade, current world events, etc. This is a lot of stuff you hear about in debates. Ironically, I'm recording this on the night of the first presidential debate for the 2020 election. So I'm dating this, really putting date, and you're going to know exactly when I'm recording this lecture, which is kind of a no-no, so I'll have to record it later when it gets old. But I just think that's pretty cool. So general elections and election day. Just catch up with the reading just so you can believe that this actually happens. Is that Byrne? Hello, Jeb. Jeb Bush, George W. Bush's brother. Let's see here. There's a debate. I think that's Rubio. Some people really get into these doggone committees. Platforms, general elections, election day. Back and forth, baby. Hot campaign lead up from mid-August to early November when I'm recording this. We are in the throes of that. Major elections are held the first Tuesday, not of the month, not of November, the first Tuesday after the first Monday. So if Tuesday was the 1st, the election will be on the 8th. You have to have a Monday pass, and then it's the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Major elections. Debates are a major part of the campaign season, especially the presidential races. Can't wait. I'm such a dork. I'm going to watch the debate tonight. This is an excerpt directly from your reading, page 266. I'm going to read it to you. Visuals about the Electoral College. Visuals... I'm sorry, I meant to add this. Visuals and body language matter as much as content and wit. 1960, Richard Nixon was running against John F. Kennedy. Kennedy was a good-looking dude. He was pretty sharp. He wore makeup for the TV thing. It was the first televised debate. Nixon had like a stomach bug, and he was looking pale, refused to wear any makeup. He was pale. He was looking unshaven. He looked like crap. And it was when people started realizing, you know what, visuals matter. Folks that listened to it on the radio thought the debate was a draw. Folks that watched it on TV thought Kennedy kicked his butt. What was the difference? The visuals. So if you watch a presidential debate, watch the visuals, watch the body language. It matters. And also how you if you can joke around, if you can, be affable. So now, let me read about the Electoral College. This is from page 266 of your reading, just so I can prove it. Look here, boom. Electoral College, booyah. Once voters have cast their ballots in November, all the election season madness comes to close. Races for governors and local representatives may be over, but the constitutional process of electing president has only begun. The electors of the Electoral College travel to the respective state capitals and cast their votes in mid-December, often by signing a certificate recording their vote. In most cases, electors cast their ballots for the candidate who won the majority of the votes in the state. There's actually some pending litigation that's going to penalize them if they don't vote the way the majority of the people voted. The states then forward their certificates to the U.S. Senate. That's how the nuts and bolts of how it works. But what is the Electoral College? The Electoral College is a constitutionally created group of individuals chosen by states with the responsibility of formally selecting the next president. The number of Electoral College representatives, i.e. delegates, is determined every 10 years by the U.S. Census. So it's based on the population. Now, why do we do this? Why don't we just do the Electoral College? Well, that's a hot topic. The popular vote versus the Electoral College. We got to think about it. If we just did the popular vote, more people live in cities in this country. Okay? In fact, you could take New York, Chicago, LA, and San Francisco and just let them pick the president if you did the popular vote. There's just more people that live in those areas than in the rest of the country. What the Electoral College does, this kind of goes back to the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists we talked about early on. The Federalists were more northern, more urban driven, more top-down. The Anti-Federalists were more bottom-up, more rural areas, that type of thing. Listen, California and Texas have way more people than South Carolina. And so California and Texas actually get more Electoral College votes than South Carolina. However, if California could overtake Texas completely in terms of population. But does that mean Texas shouldn't have a voice? Does that mean Rhode Island shouldn't have a voice? No, it's just that the voice is smaller, okay? So the Electoral College actually allows people to have votes. So the most of the population in the U.S. live in major cities. Without the Electoral College, major cities would determine most national elections like the president. And a vast majority of suburban and rural areas would have little to no voice, especially in rural states like South Carolina. So that's why we have the Electoral College. All right. Midterm elections. So in 2020, it's a presidential election. In 2022, there'll be midterm elections. So, or 20, you could say even 2023, depending on who's elected to the Senate this time, because it's a 6-year placement. But 2022, for the most part, you have midterm elections, which can affect the majority in the House of Representatives or the majority in the Senate, which means one party or another has more power. If you have a majority in the Senate, the House, and the presidency, you have a lot of power. If you have the White House but not Congress, you're very limited. If you have one house of the Congress and the White House, which is what we have currently with President Donald Trump, a Republican Senate, and then a Democratic House, you have some split power. Okay, Republicans probably have a little more power than the Democrats. That's why you're going to see a nomination and most likely a passing of a new Supreme Court justice, because constitutionally that's going through the presidency as a nomination and the Senate as a confirmation. So midterm elections affect how that mix of power is, well, divvied up. I don't know. You guys enjoying the stuff on the left here? We talked about campaigns and voting. This actually has a lot to do with fundraising. I actually skipped this section in my notes because I felt like it was really, really repeating because we started talking about the funding issues again. By the way, that's Chuck Norris. He came out and endorsed Mike Huckabee back in the day. This is at the height of the Chuck Norris meme, so that was a big win for him. But that was his biggest win because he didn't get the nomination. Technology's an issue. Let's scoot on down here and keep rolling through this reading. I'm telling you, you guys read this stuff. It's actually quite interesting. Ballot fatigue. You know what I have? I have lecture fatigue at the moment. Incumbency advantage. Actually stuck that up a little higher. Direct democracy. What in the heck is that? Direct democracy. I got it right here. Different states have different methods of direct democracy. Direct democracy occurs when policy questions go directly to the voters for a decision. These decisions typically include funding, budgets, candidate removal, candidate approval, policy changes, and constitutional amendments on a state level. Not all states offer it, and the federal government typically does not. States that do offer direct democracy, basically saying, hey, you know, we're thinking about legalizing marijuana. What do you guys think? That can be put on the ballot. That's direct democracy. They use it largely to address state constitution issues and changes. They can come in 3 forms. The first is a referendum that asks citizens to confirm or repeal a decision made by the government. Typically, it's like, hey, can we raise your taxes? I'm like, no. But everybody seems to likes to vote for that. It's like you guys like paying more in taxes. I don't understand that as an economist. The second one's called an initiative, often called a proposition. In California, they're called propositions. I hear this all the time. I'm not from California. I'm actually an Oakland A's baseball fan, so sometimes I catch like internet radio and listen to them, and they have, all right, so this week we're voting on Proposition 113. I'm like, good grief, how many propositions y'all got? Anyway, it's a law or constitutional amendment proposed and passed by citizens of a state. South Carolina, you see referendums. California, you see propositions or initiatives. There's a mix of everything. One thing you also see in California, I'm sorry, I don't want to pick on the state here. They've had a rough year, but they do a lot of recalls. What's a recall? It's a more unusual form of direct democracy that allows voters to decide whether to remove a government official from office on a state level. They've done that a ton with their governors. So that's stuff where it goes directly to the people and says, hey, what do you want to do about this? I added a final section here, how to register to vote in South Carolina. These notes are provided in your, where your reading is. I provided this PDF. You can just click right on this. You can register to vote in South Carolina right here with that click. Note, you must register to vote by October the 4th to vote this November. So if you're watching this in another semester, it's going to be early October. You click that, you can get on there, and you can, if you do it before October the 4th, you can vote in November. For more information, go to the following address. That's southcarolinavotes.gov. That's a ton of information, like where to vote, how to vote, all that kind of stuff. To register in another state, I got people all over the place in this class. How to vote, you can get there too. So let me click that, see if it'll bring this up. Might regret doing this on live. Let's see. While that's loading, oops, we jumped. Keep in mind, I broke down and added, I broke down the publisher broke down what states have in terms of numbers of, I thought we had it there too. Nope. That's who has a referendum. But there is a graphic in with your reading right next to this reading, and you go under content and Brightspace, and you go down to reading. You have syllabus, reading, and lectures. That's where you find everything. There's actually a map that tells you exactly how many Electoral College votes, say, South Carolina has. I think it's 3. Texas has, which is a lot. California has a lot. Ohio has a lot. New York, ton. So guess what? I'm not a robot. Online voter registration. I have a valid South Carolina license or ID. I do not. They give you different options. You can actually provide a utility bill. Look at this. ID number, first, middle, last. Social security number, date of birth, gender. Even give you the option on gender. You can hit submit, and they're going to mail you your voter registration. All right? No excuses, man. I'm never tell you who to vote for. But I really think you should vote. Here's your information on how to do that. This is wrapping up Chapter 7, Voting and Elections. I hope you've enjoyed the dual screen thing here. Have a great day and enjoy democracy.